If you enjoy this video, please consider giving a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And if you have any ideas for future videos, share them in the comments section below. Tales of Norse Mythology. The beginning. Myths of creation. Although the Aryan inhabitants of northern Europe are supposed by some authorities to have come originally from the plateau of Iran, in the heart of Asia, the climate and scenery of the countries where they finally settled had great influence in shaping their early religious beliefs, as well as in ordering their mode of living. The grand and rugged landscapes of northern Europe, the midnight sun, the flashing rays of the aurora borealis, the ocean continually lashing itself into fury against the great cliffs and icebergs of the Arctic Circle, could not but impress the people as vividly as the almost miraculous vegetation, the perpetual light, and the blue seas and skies of their brief summer season. It is no great wonder, therefore, that the Icelanders, for instance, to whom we owe the most perfect record for this belief, fancied in looking about them that the world was originally created from a strange mixture of fire and ice. Northern mythology is grand and tragical. Its principal theme is the perpetual struggle of the beneficent forces of nature against the injurious, and hence it is not graceful and idyllic in character, like the religion of the sunny south, where the people could bask in perpetual sunshine, and the fruits of the earth grew ready to their hand. It was very natural that the dangers occurred in hunting and fishing under these inclement skies, and the suffering entailed by the long, cold winters when the sun never shines, made our ancestors contemplate cold and ice as malevolent spirits, and it was with equal reason that they invoked with special fervour the beneficent influences of heat and light. When questioned concerning the creation of the world, the northern skalds or poets whose songs are preserved in the Eddas and Sagas declared that in the beginning, when there was as yet no earth, nor sea, nor air, when darkness rested over all, there existed a powerful being called Allfather, whom they dimly conceived as uncreated as well as unseen, and that whatever he willed came to pass. In the centre of space there was, in the morning of time, a great abyss called Ginnunga Gap, the cleft of clefts, the yawning gulf, whose depths no eye could fathom. As it was in perpetual twilight, north of this abode was a space or world known as Niflheim, the home of mist and darkness, in the centre of which bubbled the exhaustless spring Vergelmere, the seething cauldron whose waters supplied 12 great streams known as the Elivigar, as the water of these streams flowed swiftly away from its source and encountered the cold blasts from the yawning gulf, it soon hardened into huge blocks of ice, which rolled downward into the immeasurable depths of the great abyss with a continual roar like thunder. South of this dark chasm, and directly opposite Niflheim, the realm of mist, was another world, called Muspelheim, the home of elemental fire, where all was warm and bright, and whose frontiers were continually guarded by Sutra, the flame giant. This giant fiercely brandished his flashing sword, and continually sent forth great showers of sparks, which fell with a hissing sound upon the ice blocks in the bottom of the abyss, and partly melted them by their heat. Great Sutra, with his burning sword, southward at Muspel's gate kept ward, and flashes of celestial flame, life-giving, from the fire-world came. Ymir and Audhumla. As the steam rose in clouds, it again encountered the prevailing cold, and was changed into rime or hoarfrost, which, layer by layer, filled up the great central space. Thus, by the continual action of cold and heat, and also probably by the will of the uncreated and unseen, a gigantic creature called Ymir or Audhumla, seething clay, the personification of the frozen ocean, came to life amid the ice blocks in the abyss, and as he was born of rime, he was called a Rimthurs or ice giant. In early times when Ymir lived, was sand nor sea, not cooling wave, no earth was found, not heaven above, one chaos all, and nowhere grass. Groping about in the gloom in search of something to eat, Ymir perceived a gigantic cow called Audhumla, the nourisher, which had been created by the same agency as himself, and out of the same materials, hastening towards her. Ymir noticed with pleasure that from her udder flowed 4 great streams of milk, which would supply ample nourishment. All his wants were thus satisfied. But the cow, looking about her for food, in her turn began to lick the salt off a neighbouring ice block with her rough tongue. This she continued to do, until first the hair of a god appeared, and then the whole head emerged from its icy envelope, until by and by Buri the producer stepped forth entirely free. While the cow had been thus engaged, Ymir the giant had fallen asleep, and as he slept, a son and daughter were born from the perspiration under his armpit, and his feet produced the 6-headed giant Thurgelmir, who shortly after his birth brought forth in his turn the giant Bergelmir, from whom all the evil frost giants are descended. Under the armpit grew, 'tis said, of Rimthurs, a girl and boy together. Foot with foot begat, of that wise Jotun, a 6-headed son, Odin, Vili and Ve. When these giants became aware of the existence of the god Beri and of his son Bor, whom he had immediately produced, they began waging war against them. For as the gods and giants represented the opposite forces of good and evil, there was no hope of their living together in peace. The struggle continued, evidently for ages, neither party gaining a decided advantage, until Bor married the giantess Bestla, daughter of Bolthorn, the Thorn of Evil, who bore him 3 powerful sons, Odin, Vili and Ve. These 3 sons immediately joined their father in his struggle against the hostile frost giants, and finally succeeded in slaying their deadliest foe, the great Ymir. As he sank down lifeless, the blood gushed from his wounds in such floods that it produced a great deluge, in which all his race perished, with the exception of Bergelmir, who escaped in a boat and went with his wife to the confines of the world. And all the race of Ymir thou didst drown, save one, Bergelmir, he on shipboard fled, thy deluge, and from him the giants sprang. Here he took up his abode, calling the place Jotunheim, the home of the giants. And here he begat a new race of frost giants, who inherited his dislikes, continued the feud, and were always ready to sally forth from their desolate country and raid the territory of the gods. The gods in northern mythology, called Aesir, pillars and supporters of the world, having thus triumphed over their foes, and being no longer engaged in perpetual warfare, now began to look about them with intent to improve the desolate aspect of things and fashion a habitable world. After due consideration, Bor's son rolled Ymir's great corpse into the yawning abyss, and began to create the world out of its various component parts. The creation of the earth. Out of the flesh they fashioned Midgard. As the earth was called, this was placed in the exact centre of the vast space, and hedged all round with Ymir's eyebrows for bulwarks or ramparts. The solid portion of Midgard was surrounded by the giant's blood or sweat, which formed the ocean, while his bones made the hills, his flat teeth the cliffs, and his curly hair the trees and all vegetation. Well pleased with the results of their first efforts at creation, the gods now took the giant's unwieldy skull and poised it skilfully as the vaulted heavens above the earth and sea, then scattering his brains throughout the expanse beneath, they fashioned from them the fleecy clouds. Of Ymir's flesh was earth created, of his blood the sea, of his bones the hills, of his hair trees and plants, of his skull the heavens, and of his brows the gentle powers, formed Midgard for the sons of men. But of his brain the heavy clouds are all created. To support the heavenly vault, the gods stationed the strong dwarves, Nordri, Sudri, Ostri, Westri, at its four corners, bidding them sustain it upon their shoulders, and from them the 4 points of the compass received their present name of north, south, east, and west. To give light to the world thus created, the gods studded the heavenly vault with sparks secured from Muspelheim, points of light which shone steadily through the gloom like brilliant stars. The most vivid of these sparks, however, were reserved for the manufacture of the sun and moon, which were placed in beautiful golden chariots. And from the flaming world where Muspel reigns, thou sent'st and fetchedst fire and madest light, sun, moon, and stars, which thou hast hung in heaven, dividing clear the paths of night and day. When all these preparations had been finished, and the steeds, Arvk the early waker, and Alsvin the rapid goer, were harnessed to the sun chariot, the gods, fearing lest the animals should suffer from their proximity to the ardent sphere, placed under their withers great skins filled with air, or with some refrigerant substance. They also fashioned the shield, Svalin, the cooler, and placed it in front of the car to shelter them from the sun's direct rays, which would else have burned them, and the earth to a cinder. The moon car was similarly provided with a fleet steed called Alsvidar the All-Swift, but no shield was required to protect him from the mild rays of the moon. Mani and Sol. The chariots were ready, the steeds harnessed, and impatient to begin what was to be their daily round. But who should guide them along the right road? The gods looked about them, and their attention was attracted to the 2 beautiful offspring of the giant Mundilfari. He was very proud of his children, and had named them after the newly created orbs, Mani the moon, and Sol the sun. Sol, the sun maid, was the spouse of Glur, who was probably one of Surtra's sons. The name proved to be happily bestowed, as the brother and sister were given the direction of the steeds of their bright namesakes. After receiving due counsel from the gods, they were transferred to the sky, and day by day they fulfilled their appointed duties and guided their steeds along the heavenly paths. Know that Muddlefar is height, father to the moon and sun. Age on age shall roll away, while they mark the months and days. The gods next summoned Not, a daughter of Norvi, one of the giants, and entrusted to her care a dark chariot drawn by a sable steed, Rimfaxi, Frostmane, from whose waving mane the dew and hoarfrost dropped down upon the earth. Rimfaxi is the sable steed from the east who brings the night, fraught with the showering joys of love, as he champs the foamy bit. Drops of dew are scattered round to adorn the vales of earth. The goddess of night had thrice been married, and by her first husband, Naglfari, she had had a son named Ord, by her second, Anar, a daughter, Jord, and by her third, the god Dillinger. Another son of radiant beauty was now born to her, and he was given the name of Dag. As soon as the gods became aware of this beautiful being's existence, they provided a chariot for him also, drawn by the resplendent white steed Skinfaxi, Shining Mane, from whose mane bright beams of light shone forth in every direction, illuminating all the world, and bringing light and gladness to all. Forth from the east, up the ascent of heaven, Day drove his courser with the shining mane. The wolves, Sköll and Hari. But as evil always treads close upon the footsteps of good, hoping to destroy it, the ancient inhabitants of the northern regions imagined that both sun and moon were incessantly pursued by the fierce wolves Sköll and Hari, whose sole aim was to overtake and swallow the brilliant objects before them, so that the world might again be in its primeval darkness. Sköll the wolf is named, that the fair-faced goddess to the ocean chases. Another Hati, Height, he is Rodvidnir's son. He the bright maid of heaven shall proceed. At times, they said, the wolves overtook and tried to swallow their prey, thus producing an eclipse of the radiant orbs. Then the terrified people raised such a deafening clamour that the wolves, frightened by the noise, hastily dropped them. Thus rescued sun and moon resumed their course, fleeing more rapidly than before, the hungry monsters rushing along in their wake, lusting for the time when their efforts would prevail and the end of the world would come. For the northern nations believed that as their gods had sprung from an alliance between the divine element and the mortal, they were finite and doomed to perish with the world they had made. But even in this early morn, faintly foreshadowed was the dawn of that fierce struggle, deadly shock, which yet should end in Ragnarok, when good and evil, death and life, beginning now, end then their strife. Mani was accompanied also by Heike, the waxing, and Bil, the waning moon, two children whom he had snatched from earth, where a cruel father forced them to carry water all night. Our ancestors fancied they saw these children, the original Jack and Jill, with their pale darkly outlined upon the moon. The gods not only appointed sun, moon, day, and night to mark the procession of the year, but also called evening, midnight, morning, forenoon, noon, and afternoon to share their duties, making summer and winter the rulers of the seasons. Summer, a direct descendant of Svadsud, the mild and lovely, inherited his sire's gentle disposition, and was loved by all except Winter, his deadly enemy, the son of Vinsual, himself a son of the disagreeable god Vasud, the personification of the icy wind. Vinsual is the name of him who begat the winter's god. Summer from Salsather sprang, both shall walk the way of years, till the twilight of the gods. The cold winds continually swept down from the north, chilling all the earth, and the Northmen imagined that these were set in motion by the great giant Hraesvelgr, the corpse swallower, who, clad in eagle plumes, sat at the extreme northern verge of the heavens, and that when he raised his arms or wings, the cold blasts darted forth and swept ruthlessly over the face of the earth, blighting all things with their icy breath. Hraesvelgr is the name of him who sits beyond the end of heaven, and winnows wide his eagle wings, whence the sweeping blasts have birth. Dwarves and Elves. While the gods were occupied in creating the earth and providing for its illumination, a whole host of maggot-like creatures had been breeding in Ymir's flesh. These uncouth beings now attracted divine attention. Summoning them into their presence, the gods first gave them form and endowed them with superhuman intelligence, and then divided them into two large classes. Those which were dark, treacherous, and cunning by nature were banished to Svartalfheim, the home of the black dwarves, situated underground, whence they were never allowed to come forth during the day, under penalty of being turned into stone. They were called dwarves, trolls, gnomes, or kobolds, and spent all their time and energy in exploring the secret recesses of the earth. They collected gold, silver, and precious stones, which they stowed away in secret crevices whence they could withdraw them at will. The remainder of these small creatures, including all that were fair, good, and useful, the gods called fairies and elves, and they sent them to dwell in the airy realm of Alfheim, home of the light elves, situated between heaven and earth, whence they could flit downward whenever they pleased, to attend to the plants and flowers, sport with the birds and butterflies, or dance in the silvery moonlight on the green. Odin, who had been the leading spirit in all these undertakings, now bade the gods, his descendants, follow him to the broad plain called Idlewold, far above the earth, on the other side of the great stream Ifing, whose waters never froze. Ifing's deep and murky wave parts the ancient sons of earth from the dwelling of the Goths. Open flows the mighty flood. Not shall ice arrest its course while the wheel of ages rolls. In the centre of the sacred space, which from the beginning of the world had been reserved for their own abode and called Asgard, home of the gods, 12 Aesir and 24 Aesir, all assembled at the bidding of Odin. Then was held a great council, at which it was decreed that no blood should be shed within the limits of their realm, or peace stead but that harmony should reign there forever. As a further result of the conference, the gods set up a forge where they fashioned all their weapons and the tools required to build the magnificent palaces of precious metals, in which they lived for many long years in a state of such perfect happiness that this period has been called the Golden Age. The creation of man. Although the gods had from the beginning designed Midgard or Mannerheim as the abode of man, there were at first no human beings to inhabit it. One day Odin, Vili and Ve, according to some authorities, or Odin, Hoenir, the Bright One, and Luda or Loki, started out together and walked along the seashore, where they found either two trees, the ash, ask, and the elm, embla, or two blocks of wood hewn into rude semblances of the human form. The gods gazed at first upon the inanimate wood in silent wonder. Then perceiving the use it could be put to, Odin gave these logs souls. Hoenir bestowed motion and senses, and Loda contributed blood and blooming complexion. Thus endowed with speech and thought, and with power to love and to hope and to work, and with life and death, the newly created man and woman were left to rule Midgard at will. They gradually peopled it with their descendants, while the gods, remembering they had called them into life, took a special interest in all they did, watched over them, and often vouchsafed their aid and protection. The tree Yggdrasil. Allfather next created a huge ash called Yggdrasil, the tree of the universe, of time or of life, which filled all the world, taking root not only in the remotest depths of Niflheim, where bubbled the spring, the beginning, Hvergelmir, but also in Midgard, near Mimir's well, and in Asgard, near the Urda fountain. From its three great roots, the tree attained such a marvellous height that its topmost bough, called Lerad, the Peace-giver, overshadowed Odin's hall, while the other wide-spreading branches towered over the other worlds. An eagle was perched on the bough, Lerad, and between his eyes sat the falcon Vedfulnir, sending his piercing glances down into heaven, earth, and Niflheim, and reporting all that he saw. As the tree Yggdrasil was ever green, its leaves never withering, it served as pasture ground not only for Odin's goat, Hedrin, but which supplied the heavenly mead, the drink of the gods, but also for the stage Dane, Dvalin, Dunyer, and Durathr, from whose horns honeydew dropped down upon the earth, and furnished the water for all the rivers in the world. In the seething cauldron, Hvergelmir, close by the great tree, a horrible dragon called Nidhugg continually gnawed the roots, and was helped in his work of destruction by countless worms, whose aim it was to kill the tree, knowing that its death would be the signal for the downfall of the gods. Through all our life a tempter prowls malignant, the cruel Nidhugg from the world below. He hates that Asa light, whose rays benignant on the hero's brow and glittering sword bright glow. Scampering continually up and down the branches and trunk of the tree, the squirrel, Ratatosk, typical busybody and tale-bearer, passed its time repeating to the dragon below the remarks of the eagle above and vice versa, in the hope of stirring up strife between them. The Bridge Bifröst. It was, of course, essential that the Tree Yggdrasil should be maintained in a perfectly healthy condition, and this duty was performed by the Norns, or Fates, who daily sprinkled it with the holy waters from the Urda fountain. This water, as it trickled down to earth through branches and leaves, supplied the bees with honey. From either edge of Niflheim, arching high above Midgard, rose the sacred Bridge Bifröst, Asabru the rainbow, built of fire, water, and air, whose quivering and changing hues it retained, and over which the gods travelled to and fro to the earth or to the Urda well, at the foot of the ash Yggdrasil, where they daily assembled in council. The gods arose and took their horses and set forth to ride o'er the Bridge Bifröst, where is Heimdall's watch, to the ash Yggdrasil and Ida's plain. Thor came on foot, and Rest on horseback rode. Of all the gods, Thor only, the god of thunder, never passed over the bridge, for fear lest his heavy tread, or the heat of his lightnings, would destroy it. The god Heimdall kept watch and ward there night and day. He was armed with a trenchant sword, and carried a trumpet called Galar horn, upon which he gently blew a soft note to announce the coming or going of the gods, but upon which a terrible blast would be sounded when Ragnarok should come, and the frost giants and Surtra combined to destroy the world. Surt from the south comes with flickering flame, shines from his sword, the Val god's son. The stony hills are dashed together, the giantesses totter, men tread the path of hell, and heaven is cloven. The Vanas. Now, although the original inhabitants of heaven were the Aesir, they were not the sole divinities of the northern races, who also recognized the power of the sea and wind gods. The Vanas, dwelling in Vanaheim and ruling their realms as they pleased. In early times, before the golden palaces in Asgard were built, a dispute arose between the Aesir and Vanas, and they resorted to arms, using rocks, mountains, and icebergs as missiles in their fray, but discovering ere long that in unity alone lay strength, they composed their differences and made peace, and to ratify the treaty they exchanged hostages. It was thus that the Van, Nord, came to dwell in Asgard with his two children, Frey and Freya, while the Aesir, Honir, Odin's own brother, took up his abode in Vanaheim.